I always thought if the Galactic Empire ever gave me a promotion, it would mean more power, a bigger office, maybe even a seat high enough to look important. Turns out they gave me exactly the opposite. They handed me a leash, snapped it around my neck with all the formality of a tax audit, and declared in front of 36 witnesses that my new commanding officer was 3 feet tall. I was standing there expecting a towering warlord with a plasma sword, but instead I had to look down and still manage to feel like I was the one shrinking. The announcement came with all the ceremony of a royal coronation, except it felt more like a punchline I wasn't in on. The words were stamped into my record, effective immediately, under the direct supervision of Commander, followed by a name I still can't pronounce without choking on my own tongue. I remember thinking, she doesn't even clear my belt buckle, and now the Empire says I'm supposed to obey her every order. I muttered something like, well, I've been beneath worse, and one of the bureaucrats in charge of translation raised an eyebrow as though I'd just confessed to some scandalous bedroom habit. Which, honestly, wasn't entirely inaccurate. The thing about alien bureaucracy is they take everything literally. If you say, I'll jump when you say jump, they'll test you by demanding a mid-meeting leap to prove loyalty. If you joke that you're whipped, someone hands you a whip and waits for you to demonstrate. So when I made a crack about being beneath her, the paperwork suddenly included an addendum about permanent subordination. I tried to explain the double meaning, but explaining humor to them is like explaining jazz to a rock. They don't get the rhythm, only the noise. She arrived with the kind of entrance you'd expect from a galactic general. Trumpets, or at least the Empire's equivalent, which sounded like a dying walrus, blared across the hall. A fanfare shook the walls. A platoon of armored guards stamped in unison. And out she walked, boots clicking, cloak swishing, eyes blazing with the smug certainty of someone who knows she's in control. The problem was, from my angle, she looked like a child cosplaying as a dictator. 3 feet of pure fury, topped with a helmet too big for her head, balanced precariously like a crown on a toddler. I tried not to smirk. I failed. She saw it immediately. Her first words to me were sharp enough to cut steel: kneel. Now, kneeling is standard protocol, but when you're staring at someone who could fit comfortably in your backpack, the gesture takes on another flavor. I bit my tongue and obeyed, lowering myself until my knees cracked. She glared at me with the kind of intensity that made me feel like she was about to order my execution, but all she did was adjust her gloves and say, "Good. You understand your place." I couldn't help myself. I muttered under my breath, "Yeah, under you," and instantly regretted it. Her translator twitched, the guards shifted, and I was pretty sure I'd just signed up for a very different kind of service. The leash wasn't metaphorical either. They called it a compliance collar, some ancient ceremonial relic of loyalty. To me it looked like something you'd buy in a back-alley novelty shop. It even had a chain attached, polished until it gleamed. The bureaucrat clipped it on with an air of finality, and when I asked, half joking, "So, do I get a biscuit for good behavior?" the commander's expression suggested she might actually consider that part of the training regimen. The collar buzzed when she tugged it, which made the whole thing worse. I'm not saying it was uncomfortable, but I'd definitely seen similar devices in the kind of entertainment establishments the Empire pretends don't exist. My new boss, my very short, very angry boss, proceeded to give a speech about discipline, loyalty, and efficiency. The words were grand, rehearsed, meant to inspire. But every time she said, "You will be beneath me," I had to look away to stop from laughing. The soldiers around us nodded with solemn reverence, taking every phrase as gospel. Meanwhile, I was biting my lips so hard I tasted blood. The Empire doesn't do irony. They don't do subtext. They certainly don't do innuendo. Which left me alone in my private comedy club, where every command had a punchline. She turned to me midway through her address, locked eyes, and declared, "You will follow every order, no matter how small." The emphasis on small nearly killed me. I think one of my ribs cracked from suppressing the laugh. I saluted instead, muttered, "Of course, Commander. I'm used to handling small things carefully," and prayed the translator didn't process that one. Judging by the puzzled silence, maybe I got lucky. Or maybe they thought it was some human proverb. Either way, I survived the first day without being executed, which in this job counts as a win. The paperwork afterward was worse than the ceremony. 23 different forms confirming my acceptance of subjugation. Signatures in blood, mine, not hers. A biometric scan of obedience, whatever that means. At one point they even measured my knee flexibility to ensure I could kneel for long periods. By the time we finished, I was exhausted, sweaty, and wondering how I'd explain this to my old drinking buddies back on Earth. Yeah, guys, I work for someone half my height, wear a collar, and kneel when she snaps her fingers. No, it's not what you think. Well, maybe it is. Walking out of the chamber, leash jingling at my throat, I caught sight of her marching ahead of me with the stride of someone who owned the galaxy. And here's the strange thing. For all the humiliation, for all the jokes lining up in my head, part of me admired her. 3 feet tall, yet she carried herself like a mountain. If confidence could be measured in height, she was 10 feet tall at least. I sighed, resigned to my fate. If I was going to be beneath someone, I could do worse. That was day 1. My introduction to the shortest boss in the Empire, and the start of what I can only describe as the longest lesson in humility of my life. Or maybe it was the shortest. Depends how you measure it. The first morning under her command began with a voice louder than any alarm clock I've ever owned. She barked orders in that clipped, formal tone, and I stumbled awake, thinking for a second that I'd been drafted into a military daycare. She was standing on a stool, glaring at me like I'd committed treason just by breathing too loudly. "You will rise when I rise," she snapped, and I was tempted to reply, "That's usually how it works," but I didn't trust the translator not to turn that into a marriage vow. Instead, I dragged myself up, hair sticking out, eyes bleary, and muttered something about humans needing coffee. That word alone confused her so much she filed it in her datapad as if it were a weapon system. Breakfast was an ordeal. She ate some kind of nutrient gel that smelled like battery acid, while I pulled out a packet of instant oatmeal from my ration bag. The look she gave me suggested I was performing witchcraft. When the oatmeal started steaming, she flinched back as though I'd unleashed a biochemical weapon. I tried to explain it was normal, just hot water and oats, but the translator interpreted it as boiling plant mush of dominance. From then on, she regarded my breakfast as a ritual of power. I swear she wrote a note about observe subjects mush ceremony in her logs. Training drills followed, and that's where the comedy really began. She demonstrated maneuvers with the precision of a seasoned general, her tiny body moving like a coiled spring. Then she ordered me to mimic her, forgetting I was more than twice her height. Crawling through low tunnels that fit her perfectly made me look like an adult trying to squeeze through a child's playset. I got stuck halfway, ass in the air, while she tapped her foot and said, "You will lower yourself more." I nearly choked trying not to laugh. "Believe me, Commander, I'm already as low as I can go." The translator sputtered, caught between martial command and innuendo, and the squad watching us didn't know whether to salute or giggle. She insisted on inspecting my weapon, which I assumed meant my blaster rifle. When I handed it over, she frowned, turned it around in her tiny hands, and muttered something about the size being impractically large. I opened my mouth to make a joke but stopped myself, because at this point even silence risked sounding obscene. She gave it back with a straight face and told me, "You must keep it polished at all times. A commander should never see her soldier's weapon neglected." I bit my cheek so hard it hurt. Somewhere in the galaxy, a comedy god was laughing at me. The cultural clashes kept piling up. Humans need rest, breaks, coffee, actual food with flavor. She thought these were weaknesses. At one point, she marched into my quarters, caught me sipping coffee, and demanded to know what tactical advantage this black liquid provided. I tried to explain it kept me awake, made me sharper, gave me focus. The translator turned that into, "It makes me perform longer," and suddenly the entire squad had new ideas about human stamina. From that day on, she eyed my cup like it was contraband stimulants. I offered her a sip, thinking maybe she'd understand, but she spat it out instantly and accused me of poisoning myself for pleasure. I shrugged. That's kind of humanity in a nutshell. Privacy was another battlefield. Humans like doors. Humans like bathrooms without witnesses. The Empire, apparently, does not. Their philosophy is transparency breeds loyalty. Which sounds fine until you're trying to take a shower while your 3-foot boss evaluates your water consumption habits. I told her, gently, that humans prefer privacy. She tilted her head, confused, and asked, "What are you hiding?" I said, "Nothing," which made it sound even worse. Eventually I strung together a clumsy explanation about dignity, but by then she had already noted in her log that subject resists observation, possible traitorous tendency. All because I didn't want an audience for my naked time. The thing is, somewhere in all that absurdity, I started noticing her laugh. It wasn't loud, it was sharp, short, the kind of laugh that slipped out when she forgot to act like a commander. Once, I tripped over my own boots during a march and landed flat on my face. She tried to maintain authority, but a snort escaped her. For a moment she was just a person, not a symbol of alien power, not my tiny overlord, just someone who found me ridiculous. And I liked that. Too much, probably. Later, during a debriefing, I cracked a joke about humans being experts at improvisation, since we've spent our entire history turning mistakes into victories. She tilted her head, curious, and for the first time didn't dismiss it as weakness. Instead she asked me to elaborate. I explained how we invented penicillin by accident, how half of our technology came from trial and error, how we laugh at our failures instead of erasing them. She didn't laugh this time, but her eyes softened. For the first time I felt like she was listening, not to mock, not to log, but to actually understand. That night, as I tried to sleep, I found myself replaying that tiny snort of laughter in my head. The sound kept looping, and against my better judgment, I smiled in the dark. Here I was, collared and commanded by someone who barely reached my chest, someone who turned my every phrase into a bureaucratic nightmare, someone who couldn't tell the difference between sarcasm and sedition, and somehow, I was starting to like her. Great. Just great. Humanity's ambassador to the stars, falling for his boss. Not even a tall, statuesque one. No, my heart apparently had a thing for the short, furious, and perpetually exasperated. The Empire never wastes time before throwing you into fire, and apparently neither does my 3-foot boss. 1 week into our awkward commander-subordinate dance, she summoned me with all the gravity of a death sentence and declared we'd been assigned to infiltrate a rebel stronghold. The other soldiers in the room looked skeptical. A squad led by someone half their size, with me as her human sidekick, didn't exactly inspire confidence. I heard someone whisper, "At least if she falls, it won't be from very high," and had to bite my tongue not to laugh out loud. She unveiled her battle plan like it was a sacred text. Every move mapped, every corridor calculated, every contingency accounted for. It was beautiful on paper, flawless in its precision, and completely unworkable in reality. Her scheme involved synchronized movements, coded chants, and 27 separate approvals before breaching a door. I raised my hand and suggested something simple, like kicking the lock and rushing in. She glared at me as if I'd proposed heresy. "We will do this properly," she said, and I knew we were doomed. The mission began about as well as you'd expect. The moment we stepped into the base, alarms blared. Her carefully timed entrance was ruined, her soldiers panicked, and she screamed for everyone to follow the protocol while I crouched behind a crate, muttering. When she said "get down," I didn't know she meant both literally and figuratively. The collar buzzed on my neck, a sharp reminder to take her seriously, though at this point it felt more like foreplay than discipline. Chaos erupted. Rebels swarmed, our squad scattered, and my 3-foot commander barked orders no one could hear over the gunfire. She tugged my leash, dragging me out from cover, and shouted something about advancing formation. I yelled back that advancing was suicide. She yanked harder. I stumbled forward, tripped, and ended up shielding her with my body while plasma bolts ricocheted around us. She snarled that I was insubordinate. I muttered that I was just trying to keep her alive. For a moment, our eyes locked in the middle of hell, and I saw something other than fury, something almost like fear. That's when my so-called human ingenuity kicked in. Desperation is the mother of invention, and hunger is the father. I remembered the emergency rations in my pack, specifically the jalapeno-flavored trail bars Earth had cursed me with. Spicy to us, but to most alien species, pure torture. I snapped one in half, lobbed it toward the rebels, and within seconds they were coughing, wheezing, and dropping their weapons to clutch their throats. Apparently capsaicin was their kryptonite. The squad stared, dumbfounded, as I kept tossing bars like grenades. Victory by snack food. My commander was furious and impressed at the same time. Furious because I'd ignored every inch of her perfect plan. Impressed because it worked. Rebels scattered, base cleared, and our squad stumbled out alive. She stormed up to me afterward, fists balled, cloak tattered, eyes blazing with the fire of someone ready to lecture me into the next century. Instead she stopped short, looked at me, and muttered, "Your way succeeded." The words nearly killed her to say. I grinned, bruised, collar singed, heart pounding. See? Sometimes humans just wing it. We make mistakes, we improvise, we throw hot food at problems until they go away. That's kind of our thing. She shook her head, muttering about barbaric methods, but her lips twitched, betraying the ghost of a smile. I swear I caught her looking at me longer than necessary, and for the first time, I wondered if maybe she wasn't just angry because I disobeyed her, but because she hated needing me at all. Back at the ship, she filed the official report with her usual rigid phrasing, but every time her eyes slid toward me, she flushed a shade darker. She insisted I stand beside her during the debrief, even though protocol didn't require it. When the higher officers praised her for a flawless mission, she coughed, glanced at me, and admitted, "Credit is shared." The squad nearly fainted. For her to share glory was unheard of. For her to share it with a human, unthinkable. I just smiled and muttered, "I'll take being beneath you, Commander, as long as you admit I'm useful down here." The translator stuttered. Half the room gasped. She kicked me in the shin under the table, but her ears twitched in amusement. Later that night, alone in my quarters, she appeared unannounced. No guards, no formality, just her and that ridiculous oversized helmet tucked under her arm. She paced, silent, then finally blurted, "You should not have risked yourself." I shrugged, leaning back, color glinting in the dim light. That's what humans do. We throw ourselves in front of the fire and hope for the best. She scowled, muttering about reckless bravery, then softer, almost to herself, added, "It worked." I should have kept it professional. I should have nodded and let her leave. But instead I quipped, "Careful, Commander, if you keep admitting I'm right, I might start thinking you like me." Her glare could have melted steel. But instead of storming out, she lingered. Silence stretched. Then she chuckled, a short, sharp sound that hit me harder than any plasma bolt. For the first time, her laugh wasn't at my expense. It was something shared. When she finally left, I realized my heart was pounding harder than it had during the firefight. Not because I'd faced death. Not because I'd disobeyed orders. But because for a fraction of a second, my 3-foot boss had let her armor crack. And damn it, I liked what I saw underneath. After the mission, everything shifted. She still barked orders, still pulled the leash when she thought I was slacking, still reminded everyone that she was the commander and I was just a human assigned to obey. But the tone had changed. The pauses in her voice carried something softer, the looks she shot me lingered too long, and her reprimands lacked the sharp edge they once had. The squad noticed too, whispering behind her back, wondering why she allowed me to speak out of turn or why her reports suddenly included phrases like collaborative adjustment instead of insubordination. I didn't dare call her out, but every time she glanced at me across the room, I felt like the joke wasn't just mine anymore, we were both in on it. One evening, she summoned me for a private evaluation. I half expected another lecture on my lack of discipline, but what I got was her pacing nervously, trying to phrase something through the translator that kept tripping on her words. You have performed adequately, no, exceptionally, no, unsuitably adequate. She slammed the datapad down and snapped, Why is your language so complicated? I chuckled, leaning back with the smugness of someone who knew exactly why. Because we like to make things messy. Keeps life interesting. She glared, but the heat in her cheeks betrayed something else. She tried again, choosing each word carefully. I am placing you beneath me permanently. I nearly choked, because that phrase could fuel 1,000 human jokes. The translator beeped, clarified, and repeated, permanent subordination. My brain went to places the Empire would never approve of, and judging by the flicker in her expression, she knew exactly how it sounded too. For once, she didn't correct herself. The silence between us grew heavy, not the uncomfortable kind, but the charged kind, the kind where both people know something's about to shift. I broke it with a grin. So, let me get this straight, your grand declaration is that I'm yours forever. She narrowed her eyes. You twist every phrase. I shrugged. It's a human specialty. We call it flirting. That stopped her cold. Her ears twitched, her gaze darted away, and she muttered, almost inaudibly, flirting. With me. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. Well, unless there's another 3-foot commander hiding in this room, yeah. With you. The look on her face was priceless, equal parts shock, indignation, and something she couldn't disguise anymore. She opened her mouth to fire back, then shut it, then finally whispered, You are impossible. I smiled. And yet, you keep me close. The squad debrief the next morning was a circus. She delivered the usual monotone report, but when someone asked how the mission succeeded despite the flaws in the plan, she answered, adaptability. Humans excel at it. I nearly fell off my chair. She had just defended me in front of officers who normally treated me like an experiment in mediocrity. When the meeting ended, she tugged my leash as usual, but this time it was softer, almost playful, like she knew I'd read too much into it and didn't care. Later that night, I caught her outside the barracks, staring at the stars. She didn't hear me approach until I cleared my throat, and she spun around, cheeks coloring in the glow of the constellations. For once, she didn't bark at me for sneaking up. She just asked, quietly, Why do you laugh? Even when things go badly, even when you nearly die, you laugh. I thought about it, about Earth, about our messy history and our endless screw-ups. Then I said, because it's how we survive. If you can't laugh at the absurdity eats you alive. She studied me, her expression unreadable, then whispered, You are strange. I grinned. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. She shook her head, but when she laughed, it was genuine, soft, unguarded, and more dangerous to my heart than any plasma bolt. In that moment, standing under alien stars, leash still clipped around my neck, I realized I wasn't just following orders anymore. I was falling, hard, for the one person the Empire thought would break me. The confession, when it came, wasn't grand or poetic. It was awkward, stumbling, and hilariously mistranslated. I said, I think I like you, and the translator announced, I offer myself for permanent binding. She blinked, stunned, then asked if this was another human joke. I shook my head. No joke. No sarcasm. Just me. She hesitated, then reached up, grabbed the chain at my collar, and tugged me down to her level. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear, then stay. Beneath me, beside me, with me. Always. We kissed, awkward, mismatched, clumsy, because angles weren't in our favor and neither was the translator, but it was real. The leash clinked between us, the stars blazed above, and for the first time since the Empire declared me her subordinate, I didn't feel like I was under anyone. I felt like I'd found something the Empire couldn't legislate, couldn't command, couldn't even understand. Afterward, she tried to compose herself, adjusting her uniform, pretending nothing had happened. But when we walked back inside, side by side, her stride matched mine instead of marching 3 steps ahead. The squad stayed, whispering, probably imagining the worst. And maybe they were right. Maybe this was the worst idea either of us had ever had. But as she glanced at me and smirked, yes, smirked, I decided I didn't care. The Empire thought they'd tethered me with a collar, humiliated me by putting me beneath someone so small. Instead, they'd tied me to someone stronger than anyone I'd ever met. 3 feet tall, furious, brilliant, infuriating, and, somehow, mine. Humanity always finds a way to twist the rules, and this time, the punchline was simple: they gave me a boss, and I walked away with a soulmate.